doing that, it's not to say that, being different can be more difficult. And of course it can be. But by working with the family or with the parents and with the child to sort out what's going on, and help the parents be more accepting of how the child is, and then together work through how you address behaviorally the fact that that particular child is different from how the environment around them might be. So for example, I was working with a young adult. So this is somebody who's was about 19 years old at the time. Came out to their parents about being transgender. And the parents lived in a small town. They hadn't known anybody who was transgender, except from what they see on television. And they could have accepted that the child, if the child said, "Oh, I'm gay," this biologically male child, and they were so distressed by it because they were. I mean, sometimes the children will display the behaviors very openly and apparently as they're growing up, and sometimes not so much. And this was one of those not so much times. So the parents were really taken by surprise. Although sometimes we wonder, how could you have not seen it? In this case, I could actually see how they could have not seen it. But part of what they were dealing with was learning this drastic thing about this particular young person was in fact going to make physical changes, hormonal changes, surgical changes, and then live full-time as a woman, but not as a stereotypical, movie star kind of identity, but recognizing that there's a range of femininity and masculinity among people who are what we call cisgender, who are their sense of who they are, their gender identity and expression is the same one that's been attributed to them based on their biological sex.
So, okay.
But let me just say, so what happened is that by working with the family over time and keeping the communications open with them, that what ended up happening was the family was not only able to support the child, but also it opened the communications. The communications are better now than they ever were, even previously. But in doing it, there were certain behavioral accommodations. So for example, it was a balancing, because if the parents haven't yet told some of the relatives, then it was important that in certain kinds of contexts that there was some discussion about how that person was going to appear, at least until later on.
How to cope with the surrounding environment.
Right.
So let me before we get to that point, though, I mean, and you mentioned this earlier. There's before the state legislature an act relative to abusive practices to change sexual orientation and gender identity to minors. Now that's a law that's going to be passed here in Massachusetts. I just referred to the one in California. Right. All right. Why is, I mean, we've already discussed that, people don't have control over this. It causes depression. But, now there are going to be state laws preventing it. Why is it so bad? I mean, really, what are the results of this therapy?
Well, sometimes the therapy may also include negative kind of.
Well, you've already.
Well, no, I'm not talking about just words. I'm talking about sometimes you could use like shocks or medical interventions to prevent arousal. I mean, so that sometimes it's more intense and adversive than even what I was talking about before. So
there are many different types of therapy.
There are many different types of therapy.
It goes many different ways.
Right.
And the results of them, you've mentioned some. You said depression, and obviously people's sense of self-worth would go down if they're being told that who they are is bad. I mean, and I imagine the suicide is skyrocket for these people. That's a likely outcome.
Right. And their ability to function in general in society. I mean, it's just compromised because they're struggling against who they are, which takes a lot of energy. And
I would imagine people like that have an increased risk of substance abuse.
Oh, absolutely. I thank you for bringing. I mean, the substance abuse that goes way up, way up.
Because you're frustrated and you're having trouble dealing with society, and that's what people self-medicate.
Right.
Do things like that.
Right. And also there's increase and you're if you're sold on the fact that how you are is wrong, then you're letting down the people who put you in therapy, which makes you even more upset. Plus, it's just wrong because it says that being these ways are bad. And being these ways is a sickness. And being these ways is not a sickness. Being different in terms of one's sexual orientation or one's gender identity or expression is not a sickness. It's not bad.
So instead of doing these things, obviously, and you hit upon this a little bit with the 19-year-old you were talking about, therapy should be more of the family working together in how to deal with the environment, how the individual approaches their environment and deals with whatever problems arise from not fitting in.
Right.
That would be good therapy.
That would be good therapy. That would be good therapy. And the truth is, a lot of times, I mean, for example, I had phone calls from mothers of 2 different 4-year-olds several years ago, the same week. I don't usually get that many in one week, especially with children that young, both biological males. And there were some other issues with at least one of the children, but one of the children came in and I worked with the child and we, tried to sort through what was going on and what was going to happen, recognizing that we don't know what's going to, in the long term, going to be right for this kid. Whether this kid is just going to end up being...
Kid's 4 years old.
4 years old. The kid could end up being a relatively, quote, effeminate, heterosexual male.
A metrosexual, there you go.
Right, a metrosexual. And they could be, gay and be on their gender expression could be a little more on the feminine side. Or they could end up being transgender or transsexual in terms of actually making some physical changes. But, again, it's premature to know with a 4-year-old.
One would think.
The other one wanted me to do reparative therapy. And I basically explained what I had said earlier, that this is a bad thing, and I don't do it, but that, and why? Because it's detrimental, it's wrong. And when I actually said to this mother, I said, that, it can create substance abuse, high risk of suicide, high risk of severe depression. She acknowledged that a relative in another country had killed himself under similar circumstances.
And that's because, again, it's not something they have internal control over. And being taught through therapy, no less, that what you are and who you are is bad and wrong. Maybe in some contexts, some people want to teach you that it's evil.
Right.
That really does a job on your self-esteem, and it leads to all these other problems, including and significantly suicide.
Correct.
So this is a very bad thing.
It's a very bad thing.
And kudos to our brothers and our sisters in California who were able to pass a law preventing this, recently upheld by the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, and now hopefully they'll get this particular law passed in Massachusetts. So if you want to do something about this, I guess the thing to do is to either call your state legislator and ask them to pass the act relative to abusive practices to change sexual orientation and gender identity in minors, and that's House Bill 154.
Or they could get information about what they can do by going to the Mass Transgender Political Coalition website, which is masstpc.org, or the Mass Equality website.
So good. Well, thank you very much. Really appreciate it, Alex. It's always good to have you.
Yeah.
You always have a great perspective, and thank you for tuning in to Legal Lines. Legal Lines is brought to you by the Massachusetts, I should continue to say the award-winning Legal Lines is brought to you by the Massachusetts LGBTQ Bar Association. My name is Tim Lynch. Tune in next time, which I believe will be February 19th, where I will have folks from Youth on Fire talking about the explosion of LGBTQ homeless youth in Massachusetts. Thank you again. Thanks, Alex.